It's the Brad and John Show.
It is the Brad and John Show. Today's date is the 24th, John, is that right? 24th of September?
Yeah, we're 3 months away from Christmas Eve, Brad.
Oh, my God. Hard to believe that. Okay. First off, do we want to talk about the John Boesch thing? Is that what we want to talk about? Do we want to go to Chesterfield?
Yeah, sure. Why not? What would you like to mention there, Brad, other than the fact that he flaked on us 24 hours ago?
You said that you had a couple people contact you yesterday, and I know you don't divulge the contents of what you talk about, but the bottom line is that you think he didn't realize what kind of show this was?
I don't know. I mean, what I do know is I had two folks with a lot of knowledge of the situation, and I would go to my grave singular without saying their name. But I think one of the things that I was incorrect about yesterday, Brad, Jack Suntrup's piece, which brought the story back because it included the video of the scuffle between John Boesch and Representative Michael Burton. In the story, Boesch said that he left the St. Louis County Democrat organization at the end of August, and it had nothing to do with Michael Burton. And I said I actually agreed with him because it would seem like, I took that at face value, that a lot of times people work on a contract or for a short period of time. What someone who knows the situation well reached out to me and said, technically it didn't have anything to do with the Burton altercation, but it had to do with the fact that there were other things that, that Boesch decided to do, in this person's words, unilaterally. And I won't go into any more detail, Brad, because I don't want to first of all, Mr. Boesch isn't here to discuss it. And even though, as I often say on the show, Brad, just because someone treats you a certain way doesn't mean that you have to treat them back a certain way. So even though John Boesch flaked on a scheduled interview yesterday, we're going to be respectful of him. Even though he's disrespectful, we're going to be respectful of him. And I won't give too many details on the unilateral decision that apparently John Boesch made with Democrat stuff, because I don't want to reveal who, told this stuff to me. But Boesch was apparently making decisions without getting approval from people he needed approval from. And because of that, according to one Democrat source, Boesch was given the ultimatum, okay, you can either resign or you're going to get fired. And Mr. Boesch, according to this Democrat source, said, okay, well, I'll just resign and no big whoop, So, that happens sometimes. People are told either we're going to, and I guess because of the Burton situation, people that were there that day some people took Burton's side and didn't let that go. But I think the decision to move Boesch out was due to decisions and judgment that Boesch had that folks were like, whoa, what are you doing? So that's what I heard from somebody who knows. And then a second Democrat, who I won't give any details about, wasn't surprised, Brad, that Boesch chose to flake and that Boesch chose to act impulsively. And that's all I'll say because, again, Mr. Boesch isn't here to defend himself against other Democrats. He's not here to explain why he chose to flake on a radio interview that he agreed with you that he would do. So we're going to be respectful to him.
Well, I will say this, and this is maybe anecdotal experience on my part, but having many years in this business and having run talk stations before, and I referenced a lot of crazy stuff that happened when I did my AM station, which is now crap. But when we did this as talk station, I had Brian Nieves on there and a bunch of other, talk show hosts, Neil Bortz out of Atlanta and Dennis Miller and things like that. I found it very prevalent that the Democrats were always trying to get people off my radio station. But when I offered the Democrats time on the radio station, they never wanted to appear, which I always thought was sort of interesting. They're complaining about a bias that they complained that my radio stations were, preferential to the Republicans. But when I gave them time to come on and say their side of the story, they would have nothing to do with that, which I always found interesting. And that's sort of the way it has been for a long time, even on national media. You know what I'm saying? If you look at that.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Brad. Now, if I certainly get what you're saying on a national level and then on a state level. Now, in defense of a Jonathan Boesch, there's really, in my opinion, there's not a whole lot to gain for him for going on our station or going on a conservative station. Like, John's going to get continue to get work in St. Louis area Democrat politics. There's not a whole lot going on. Like in South County, they found Democrats had some patsy to run against the Republican that got the Archer down there. They had a guy like Shartley or Shartsky or something that was kind of a patsy, kind of a pudgy, nondescript guy that ran in South County. So there's not a whole lot going on for county Democrats, but they do have competitive races in the middle of the county that are going to be like, people will hire John Boesch, I'm sure. He doesn't need to come on a radio show like ours and defend his actions, but I thought it was magnanimous of you, Brad. And this is the type of person you are. I thought it was magnanimous of you to say, come on in. We'd love to have you talk about it. You've got a side of the story that hasn't been portrayed. And also, for Jack Suntrup, in defense of Jack Suntrup at the Post-Dispatch, you only have so many proverbial column inches in a newspaper, or you only have so much space in an online story to give one guy's side of the story. So Boesch would have been able to come on and say, hey, here's what really happened with Burton. I didn't pull his beard. He was being a jerk, and I wanted him out of the office. So my main point, Brad, it's magnanimous of you to have offered Mr. Boesch the opportunity to come on this show. And I also think it's a credit to who you are that you're not going to read one of the lines that John Boesch texted to you, which would have gotten him fired at a public institution. Yeah. And I think that says a lot about you, Brad.
Well, hey, he sent me something, and I screenshot it to you in confidence yesterday, John, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe he just said that to me.
Yeah. So, here's the thing. I think the other thing that I think about a lot, Brad, is that there's people, when I listen to Democrats on the radio or I read Democrat posts, I take the value of it and I think, okay, I'm a pretty reasonable person. They make a good point. I think Democrats who listen to our show, who listened to our show yesterday and then reached out and said, hey, here's what's really going on with John and here's where he is. I think reasonable people see what's going on and they take it as a data point and they move on.
Well, as crazy as it may sound, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm just trying to say, look, if you want to be in the show, and we normally don't have guests, but if you disagree with something that John or I or both of us has said, my phone number is 314-280-8880. It's on the websites. And obviously, John Boesch found my number someplace because, in fact, he texted me. And, he wouldn't text John because John has a top secret level 3.
And I don't mean to interrupt your point, Brad, but we are not a call-in show. Right. We're not Sports Open Line in the 1980s. But and you know how when Brad and I sat down at the beginning of the show, before we did our first show, I said, I don't want us to be one of those shows where we have a speaker on and we say, so what are your top priorities in the legislature this year? We're not a call-in show. There's a dozen of them in the St. Louis area.
Right.
But Brad, you are magnanimous about allowing people on. You do a great job with it, Brad.
But see, the point being is I believe that, and I know this sounds like I'm FOS, so to speak, and people know what that means. But to the point where I believe in having both sides of the story. And what's frustrating to me is you have some stations that essentially say, if you're a rhino, we want nothing to do with you. And I'm not saying that's necessarily Tracy's station, but I think it is Tracy's station. And especially, I've told you the story we're going on today. Today was 2 weeks ago that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Is it 2 weeks ago now? Is that hard to believe?
It was the 10th. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, you're right, Brad. It would have been 2 weeks. God, it feels like forever ago, doesn't it?
I know, 2 weeks ago. That Thursday, 2 weeks ago tomorrow, I was literally driving around and I thought to myself, you know what? I'm so sick and tired of how, I don't like you because, like in certain things, like in business, in dating, like if you've talked to people on dating sites, they talk about this all the time. There are women that say, if you voted for Trump, swipe left. And I'm thinking to myself, God, how sad it is that we have these predetermined, in our mind that if you do this, if you voted for this person, if you showed up at a Republican rally, if you showed up at an anti-abortion rally or a pro-abortion rally, you're this kind of person. And literally I said to myself, I'm done. I don't want to be part of that anymore. That's when I declared myself an American. Now I am an American.
Yeah, I like that, Brad.
And
to your point, let's go a little bit further and more local and give credit where it's due. On 97.1 yesterday, the Mark Reardon show had Democrat St. Louis County prosecutor Melissa Price Smith on. So Mark has a Democrat who he probably disagrees with on some things and probably agrees with on some things, coming on talking about her first few months on the job, what her goals are, and what she thinks she's accomplished. But so reasonable people, I think, listen to 97.1. And that goes back to, Brad, when we talked in A Block today, September 24th, about what I think Catherine Hanaway's approach should be. She should do serious stuff in office, and she should also go on, quote unquote, right-wing radio that might not agree with her on everything and take their hard questions. When they say, aren't you controlled by the Trilateral Commission and the Gates Commission? Like, answer ridiculous questions and let reasonable people see that you're a reasonable person.
John, you're wrong on that. She's controlled by the Bilderbergers. Everybody knows that. Come on.
Bilderberg, that's right, Brad.
Right. That's who she's controlled by. But see, I say once again, if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, and if I were a Democrat in office right now, I would be reaching out to the Mark Coxes and the Mark Reardons of the world, because I already got the Democrats. They're already behind me, right? Because
I get exactly what you're saying. And there might be people who are a little bit more open-minded.
Exactly.
Who say, and the other thing is, too, I'm guessing that a Melissa Price Smith, who, let's say she's a really good litigator, excuse me, and manager of that office, there's not anything Mark Reardon is going to ask her that's going to scare her that she needs to be intimidated about.
Right, and take it one step further. Look at the last election, okay? For a long time, the Democrats essentially said, hey, we've got all the black people, we've got all the union boys and girls in line. They are Democrats. They have all been Democrats. They'll always be Democrats. How many of those black people and those construction dudes and dudettes, the union workers, the iron workers, the carpenters, the Mike Rowe contingent of our United States, how many of those crossed over and voted for Trump? Because they were so tired of all the fruity, what do you call it? You always have a term for that. What do you call it? The fruity, what's your term?
The rainbow color? The alphabet groups? What is it, Brad?
You say something about rainbow fruity or something like what? Come on.
Yeah, and who knows what I say, Brad? It was probably offensive, though.
But see, once again, people heard Trump. They heard, and perfect example. I don't think this has gotten much news. They were going to shut down the Granite City steel plant again. And they are now saying that Trump personally, because they crafted this deal between Nippon Steel or whoever it is and the USS Steel that they bought into or something like that. And he personally said, no, you're not shutting that place down. And it was interesting because I heard Annie Fry say this yesterday, that part of the reason he did that was, if you remember this, I think in 2017, he actually showed up at the Granite City Steel plant, and she made the comment she was so impressed with the union workers who were there supporting him. And once again, traditional Democrats, if you were to look at the what do you call it, the expense evaluation reports that the Democrats have to file, or the unions have to file.
It would be almost always in favor of the Democrats.
Right. They're spending money for the Democratic candidates. Okay, here's their union brethren who are saying, okay, enough of the goofy, weird stuff that's going on in the Democratic Party. At least this guy, is for us. He's for labor. He's for union. He's pro-union. And his background, he's pro-construction guy. So the steel workers love that because steel's used in construction all the time. So, good for him. I don't get it. Okay, on to the Chesterfield thing. I found it fascinating what you talked about. 2 traffic stops. And one of them was, there's always the accusation that, like they call driving while black, and I've always also heard it driving while Mexican. I've heard people, they're just pulling over Mexican people because they're checking their papers. Okay, the one story you had on the Chesterfield news blotter, or Chesterfield Police news blotter, was she was doing 100 miles an hour. Okay. If you were in this country illegally and you were concerned about having any contact with law enforcement, would you be driving down I-40 or I-64, Highway 40 at 100 miles an hour, John?
Absolutely not. And it reminds you of all the great body cam videos that you see on YouTube, right, where there will sometimes be clean-cut people transporting dope, but a lot of times you'll have a car driving 40 miles per hour in the slow lane, billowing cannabis smoke, and get pulled over, and they have pounds of weed hidden in the spare. Like, so wouldn't you be on your best behavior if you're
Yes.
transporting dope?
Driving 10 and 2, turn signals, doing the speed limit. You know, I mean, you would be like choir boy driver, okay? It's just like, and you talk about this, there are some incredible body cam videos. There's one, if you've seen this, I've seen this a couple times, where I think it's someplace like in Arizona or something like that, a highway patrol guy pulls over a box truck, and he talks to the driver, and he goes, hey, what do you got in the back? Oh, just some pallets of stuff. And he repeatedly asks him, what kind of cargo is that? Pallets of stuff. And finally he says, can I open up and take a look? And they open up, and there's a bunch of illegal immigrants in the back. And I'm going like, dude, not only are you in trouble for transporting illegal immigrants, but you've essentially lied to a police officer. They're not going to take that kindly. That's one more strike against you, right, John?
Yeah, and I also love, I saw one video where a guy was transporting a load of stolen iPads. And they ask him what was in the back. He says, I don't know. It's cargo. Like at least make something up, right?
Okay, quick story. Something happened last week. I'm not going to get any details. And I have a couple friends in Chesterfield. And one friend called me and asked me about what was going on. And I essentially said, why don't you ask some people? So this person asked some people in Chesterfield. And these were official people. And they went, well, it turns out this person knows another person who's the mother of a Chesterfield police officer. And this friend of mine called that woman and said, okay, a week and a half ago at this particular location, I'm not going to give it out because that would give what was all about, what was going on. And she said, well, they're trying to keep that on the down low because of blah, 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 blah. She told her the whole true story. Okay, my contention is the more affluent a neighborhood is, the better they are at tamping down the news coverage of not so good things that happen in their area. And I say it time and time again. I haven't been a police dispatcher for decades, but some things never change. You know what I'm saying, John?
I get what you're saying. You make great examples of that about Clayton. And a critic like me would say, well, usually there's less, nonsense going on out here. But I think you're right. I would make the argument that they hire better qualified professional PR people to tamp the news down.
Yeah, you're right there. But the idea, and my point is always, and this is what I say to the people who live in Clayton and Chesterfield, tell me there's no crime there. And I say to them, the criminals have cars and they can drive. Do you think they want to go to North City and break into somebody's house and get an old York stereo system from the 70s? Or do you think they want to break into your house and steal your Sonos, your Sonos stereo system? Guess which one they want?
Actually, they want to get off at Bell Fountain Road on 270, go north. And right once they cross where the Commerce Bank used to be, they want to turn left and see Brad Hildebrand at Magic Markets there.
Here's where I am.
Brad's doing an in-store appearance there. John can't make it. He's got anything else to do. But Brad will be there.
I'll be there. Okay, I'm going to leave the office today, and hopefully I won't have my beard tugged by somebody who's caught me in the parking lot.
I'll never tug your beard, Brad. I'll see you tomorrow.